Hi, I'm here with Oakley Anderson Moore, director of the upcoming climbing film The Last Wild Mountain. I'm going to talk to her a little bit about the film and her life as a climber. How you doing today, Oakley?
I'm doing great, Patrick. How about yourself?
Fantastic. Looks pretty warm there. A lot warmer than
It
here.
is. Yeah, it's about 72 degrees.
Yeah, it's about 22 degrees here.
Sounds wonderful.
So I have some questions relating to your climbing background and the film. If you don't mind, I'm going to jump right in.
Sure.
So when did climbing become a big part of your life?
Um, well, I don't know. I always have trouble trying to answer this. When did it become an important part of my life? It's hard to tell because, my dad was a climber from the 70s. He's kind of who introduced me to climbing. And all his friends and his stories are all sort of revolved around climbing. And he taught me to climb when I was little. I started in like a Swami belt and stuff. So it was kind of already a part of my upbringing, like culturally. So I can't say that there was like a particular moment where I decided that it was important. I mean, it's not really important just because climbing's pretty much an unimportant thing. You don't need to live, you don't need to climb to live, for example. But I think there's a lot of important, cultural things that are going on in the climbing subculture. And at some point, I realized on my own that it was a valuable thing to be a part of. Couldn't quite tell you when exactly that would have been.
When did filmmaking come into your life?
Well, I started doing film in college. I didn't really have much, you know, film experience before then. I was always into storytelling. Can you hear that bird? Hey, it's natural. Shut up. I'll get the sound guy to. Oh well. Uh, Here, let me show you. There's like a bunch of crows. All right, they're leaving. Yeah, so I started doing film in college. I was always interested in storytelling and performance. I was pretty involved in theater before then. And then when I found film, it was kind of like a combination of storytelling and this whole new medium that was pretty interesting. I met a couple guys in college that were into it, and I just started working on their, sets for various things, and I thought it was really neat. And I liked the whole collaborative aspect of filmmaking and how you're working with other people and working in sort of a group movement to get something created artistically.
What inspired you to combine your film and climbing backgrounds? What specific point where you say, I have to do this with this film?
Well, what happened was, I graduated in 2007, I think, summer, and I was kind of like, well, what do I do now? I think everyone kind of has that moment after they graduate from college. And I had, like, in the midst of all this graduating and whatever, I had applied for this grant from Banff Mountain Center. And it was like this idea I had for a documentary about climbing subculture. And I applied for it, and then I kind of forgot about it. and then uh, and then a couple months later, I got this letter saying that they liked my idea and they were going to give me some money. Not very much, but a little bit. And so it was, yeah, exactly. And so that was basically the moment I was like, okay, well, if someone else thinks it's as valuable to do, then I'm going to go ahead and do it. And so that was kind of how I started.
How did you find the Banff Mountain Center that fund? Just kind of searching around on the.
Yeah, I can't really remember, but it was just randomly. I mean, I did always know that. I mean, this is kind of like a project that I'd always thought about, having known, been involved for so long in sort of this mountain lore and culture and stuff. So I just kind of stumbled upon it, I guess.
On on the website for the Last Wild Mountain, the project, you state that you are telling an important story and preserving a culture. I know that the history and preservation are important, but why is this story so significant, and how does it relate to the everyday climber?
Sure. Well, I think what's important about this particular story, because it's basically trying to, like, the particular film is basically trying to show like the birth and growth of climbing as a specific subculture. And I think what's important about that is it's kind of this interesting look into, you know, Americans. Maybe it's a little bit more even, maybe it's not really that important in particular to climbers. Like it might enhance your experience climbing and being involved with climbing to see this film. But even more so than that, I think it's kind of like, it's trying to kind of look at climbing as this social experiment where this group of people decided to reject whatever was going on, whatever the agenda was of mainstream society, and sort of form their own like utopia. That's kind of like the premise of the film. And then, so how did that work? Because in climbing, it's such an unusual activity. There's not, compared to other like sports, there's no, referees and stuff. Like the rules are all sort of decided by a group of people, and this is all done by oral communication and occasionally in print. And it's like such an unusual way for a group of people to govern themselves. What's important about that story is looking at it and saying like, what happened? How did that work? The way that the people came to agreements or disagreements about this entire world that they created. So I think it's important in that sense, like looking at it as this sort of utopia that was, embarked on, and how did it fare? Did it succeed or did it fail? And, I think that's important for a lot more than just climbers, although I think in particular climbers will get a lot of it.
Absolutely. I mean, just from the little bit I've seen in the trailer and the media you have on the site, I expect to get a lot out of it.
Well, good. I hope you do.
How long have you been at it with this project?
Well, so basically, like I was saying earlier, that Banff project, that was like summer of 2007. And so I think then it was fall of 2007 that I started. Some of that time was full time. Some of it was part time because then, I have to work on other stuff as well. So yeah, I guess since then, much to the surprise of the Banff people, because they were thinking it would be done in a year. They keep me like, hey, did you finish that yet? But yeah, that's kind of what I thought too. Being sort of naive and just out of this academic bubble of, college, I was like, oh, I'll do this project. And the year after, I'll do something else. And then, like 4 years later, I'm barely coming to the end of the tunnel on this project. So I'm glad it's taken this long, although I did not think it would take this long.
I can imagine you've learned a lot during the journey.
Man, yeah. I just wish I could go back in time and tell myself 3 years ago what would have happened. And yeah, I mean, there's so much you learn. I don't know if it's this hard for every film. I'm assuming it gets easier. But yeah, this time we had to basically figure everything out from scratch. And so sometimes exciting, sometimes painful, but either way, right? Now I'm a lot more experienced as far as filmmaking goes.
It's a learning experience college can't provide.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they definitely didn't teach me anything about this. Like, and if I could go off on this tangent of not,
No, go
like,
ahead.
stop me, but like, so for example, in school, they just teach you whatever important stuff. I wouldn't have traded that theoretical education for anything else, but for example, they don't teach you anything about how to raise money for a film or any business part of anything, at least in the program I was in. Like, I'm like, I don't even know what an LLC is. Like, I don't even know what any like business stuff, how you run this as a business. And so when we first started, I was like, all right, how am I going to get some money for this project? And I was like, I'll just call these companies and just, like be like, yeah, adventure company X, like, can you give me money for this really great project? Like, oh, no one would have ever thought of that before, right? So that's what we did. I just started cold calling like Black Diamond or whatever. And I would just like talk to the receptionist and I'd just be like, hi, yeah. And I'd like tell the receptionist the whole story. And she'd be like, yeah, you should probably talk to someone like in marketing about this. And so eventually maybe they would pass me on to them. And I'd just talk to all these people and they were all eventually like, well, it sounds interesting. But are you going to go to OR? Are you going to go to OR? And I didn't even know what OR was. Like, I'm not, hadn't really been much involved in the industry of the outdoors. And I found out via Google that OR was outdoor retailer, which I've now been to several of them. And yeah, and then, but so just to add another funny thing, hopefully this doesn't show up on the outdoor retailer site because I could get in trouble. But I was like, all right, we'll go to outdoor retailer. This is where all the companies are that could give us money. And um, me and the guy working on it at the time, we looked and it was like $400 or something. It was like a week before OR. And we're like, oh, it's like $400 a person to get in. Like, wow. Like, I didn't even have that much money. I didn't even have enough money to get in for both of us, plus all like getting there and getting all the materials, like photocopying stuff. So we were like, oh, we definitely can't do this. And um, so I was like, whoa, what kind of loophole could we do? So what we did is I was like, what? I looked and it was like, oh, media gets in for free. And I'm sure other people do this, but I was like, all right, what media outlet could we pretend to be that no one could possibly follow up on this with us? And I figured, oh, if we were like some international uh, thing, no one's going to wake up at 3 in the morning to call international. And since I used to live in Italy, I was like, okay, so I made up this fictitious Italian radio station. And I wrote like this, I made business cards, and I put letterhead and I wrote this fake letter in Italian from this guy. He's like, I'm the producer. I'm hiring this freelance American to go to the show. And I translated it into Babelfish. So it was like a really poor English translation. It was like, I make good sound. And, it was like terrible. And I opened like an Italian email account and then I sent it in and then like, yeah, like within a couple days we'd been approved. And so that's how we went to outdoor retailer for the very first time. So under the guise of this fictitious radio station, we got in. I was like, oh God, I hope we get in. So we scheduled all these appointments. And then we got in, we just flipped our badges and then nonchalantly had meetings with all these companies while we were there. But yeah, they didn't teach me that in film school.
What big names did you interview for this film, and what was their take on the project and the direction of what direction do they see climbing as a lifestyle headed?
Hmm, good question. Well, I mean, we interviewed a lot of people. What we kind of did was, um, well, occasionally we centered our interviews around events, like I might have mentioned earlier to you on another day. Like they had a Gunks Climbers reunion, and so we went out for that to get all these old Bulgarians and not so old Gunks climbers. Um, but what we basically did, I had a big list of people that I thought would be interesting to interview and offer, you know, different opinions or would their stories were I wanted to piece it together with these various people, and then we basically just saw who we could get a hold of, and then we made a big trip that was basically like geologically. We just had a road trip that was just like, okay, we're interviewing someone here and then here and here. We just kind of connected the dots in a line and with our van, and we just went to all these people. And So yeah, I mean, some of the people we had I had a long correspondence with before we actually got out to their homes, but occasionally people we would get a hold of, like we would be at someone's house and they would be like, "Did you interview so and so?" And we'd be like, "No, we've been trying to get a hold of them, but evidently they like don't even have the internet, or whatever. So we'd find more people along the way, and we end up interviewing almost 50 people. And the way the film works, it's kind of set up, it goes back and forth between the 50s, 60s generation and the 70s generation. And that's basically the structure of the film. That's basically the only characters we really follow. Anything after that, we don't really follow. There's occasionally some younger climbers that give sort of context. But so from the 50s and 60s, we interviewed Royal Robbins, Tom Frost. I'm trying to think of the East Coast guys: Jim McCarthy, Dick Williams, Roger Derryberry, who was a really longtime companion of Warren Harding. And that's how we are able to include Warren Harding in the film, because Derryberry was his longtime, and he filmed a lot of interviews with Warren. And so he's letting us use those in the film. So those are kind of like the 50s and 60s guys. There's a lot of them. I'm trying to think who I'm trying to, if you ask me, I'm like trying to think of our road trip. Like I'm like, okay, first we went to, but yeah. And from the 70s, we interviewed um, John Long, Ron Kauk, John Backer, Jim Erickson, um, Henry Barber, Steve Wunsch, Lynn Hill. You can see I'm going West Coast to East Coast on all these because like that's how we started. Um, so yeah, I think we've interviewed a lot of really neat people, and I was glad that they were willing to let us come in and see as far as what their opinions were on the way climbing is going. It's pretty different opinions. Yeah, because some people, I mean, there's definitely some people we interviewed who are, and you'll see this a lot on various forums, people talking about stuff. You go on Super Topo, it doesn't take you that long to figure out that some older climbers are definitely unhappy with the way that climbing has changed. I mean, in obvious ways that there's just like a lot more people climbing, and other reasons as well. There's some older people that are like, well, the climbers of today aren't like us, or they think, oh well, it's too bad for the climbers of the day today because they don't have like all that fresh possibilities of different routes that we had and stuff. But there's also people on the opposite end of that extreme. I mean, like Jim McCarthy, for example, was one of the oldest guys that we interviewed. He had a different opinion. He was just completely amazed at what people are doing today, and he keeps up with a lot of, he follows. Obviously, he's pretty involved with AAC. He follows a lot of climbing, and he's has nothing but amazement for what people are doing and thinks that whatever. So really, there was a lot of different opinions, which I guess makes sense because like all those people, if you're trying to pinpoint why they might have, what they were doing climbing, like why they were climbing, they all had seemed like a lot of them had very different reasons anyways they were climbing. So with that, they have a lot of different opinions on how the climbing world changed or didn't change.
Absolutely. You said you mentioned that you interviewed John Backer. What was that like? That had to have been right before his untimely death.
Yeah, I think it was about 2 months before his accident, which was really surreal. I mean, is because it's just sort of obviously just it's unusual because you're like, well, wow, I just interviewed some person, and now you have these tapes of their interview that you watch over and over again while you're editing, and it's just takes a while to even really realize what that means. So that was really different. It's also kind of made editing more challenging because, which I think is a good thing, and it will made me think about all the interviews in turn. Because, if you're working with someone who just passed away, you're like, well, you have these difficult choices. Like, well, do I have to soften what I was going to say because I don't want to be disrespectful because now this person is gone and they can't, like, this is the final word. They can't, rebuttal or whatever to the film or something, for example. And then on the opposite side of that spectrum too, I mean, well, am I gonna be the opposite way, be overly sensitive and overly, just overly sensitive to this person's legacy because they're now gone. And it's kind of like you want to strike a good balance, and it makes you think about all of interviews because, I mean, you want to be fair to everyone in the film. And so it definitely made me consider everyone's interview and everyone's, how to best be balanced and fair, like Fox News in the, in the film, because there's certainly some challenging parts of the film. And, with anything that's probably worth watching, there is some, conflict. And so striking the right balance has been a pretty difficult challenge to do. I don't really have a personal agenda where I'm trying to show who was right and who was wrong about whatever. Not that this whole conflict doesn't even take up all of the film. But it's definitely been something I've had to consider a lot more. And, like after Backer's death, it was like, became a very interesting um, dilemma, I guess.
It makes a lot of sense. Because I mean, climbing is one of those things where these things do happen. So it could happen with any of the people you interviewed. That's why, like I said, keep the balance.
Yeah, definitely.
So, what are some of the big name climbing spots that we expect to see in the film?
Well, the main places that you're gonna really see and hear about are the story focuses just on the three classic areas of the time. So that's Yosemite, the Gunks, and Boulder, Colorado area, just because you know that's where most of the story takes place. So we focus on those three areas, um, and how people travel to those different areas. One exception is we also talk about the climbers camp in Jenny Lake, but of course that was shut down in the late '60s, so it's not there for all of the story. But yeah, we basically focus on those areas because they're like the big cultural centers. Well, not to mention they're also big as far as like those landmark climbs of the era. You will see other places. The story doesn't really center there, but you'll see we everywhere we went, we at least tried to film something like, we had a car mount and we would suction cup it onto the door and we'd film like some cool location that we were passing by. So you'll see, basically us traveling through wherever we were going to do the interviews. And then the story itself focuses on like kind of like the big three cultural centers of the 50s through 70s.
So I'd imagine there's some Camp 4 stuff in there,
Yeah, definitely.
kind of iconic for climbing of that time.
Definitely. Yeah, we definitely do Camp 4. I tried to make sure that the story wasn't Yosemite centric because, you know, a lot of the California climbers, a lot of stories have already been done about them. And there's a lot of important people that weren't necessarily from California. However, everyone in climbing that made up part of the movement came to Yosemite. So I try to do pretty balanced and accurate, you know, tapestry of the people. But the people all came to those areas. So
So, what do you hope to accomplish with this film? Kind of a tricky question, I guess.
yeah. Let's see. Well, um, obviously the big goal is just to make a film that people will be able to see, other than people on like YouTube, which is great too. But yeah, so obviously the film, as far as what I'm trying to accomplish, in a real specific, like actually tangibly what we're trying to accomplish. When we're done, I think we'll try to see whatever film festivals we can get in, and try to get in the best ones that we can get into, and try to get some exposure that way. And then depending on what happens, or regardless, I mean, what happens, I think we're gonna do a road tour. Seems to be pretty popular, at least for climbers, and it's you can kind of pick out where you think you could go, and people would want to come out.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of places on the East Coast that people would love to see something like that.
Yeah, and there's already this, in this tradition of slideshows and screenings and things where climbers come out. So we'll definitely do something like that.
You know where you should try and get? Just popped in my head now. The New River Rendezvous would be a big hit.
Oh yeah, okay. I'll have to ask you about it later when we're planning our thing, and you can fill me in on the details. But yeah, so basically our goal is start out in some film festivals, see what we can get into, because obviously in film your goal is always just to get as many people as you can to see your film. Um, and I think a lot of people that aren't climbers would be pretty interested by this material, and so we're going to try and see if that would be the case. And then either while we're doing that, because maybe that might take a year of doing stuff. While we're doing that, maybe at the same time we might drive around and show it. Just pull out the van and be like, "All right, we're here."
People like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, get some beer and have people come out, and yeah. So that's basically the goal of what I'd hope to accomplish. As far as anything more, you know, like philosophical, like what I would hope to accomplish. I mean, I just, if it's a good story that makes people think about themselves and their own identities and our current, their current lives and our social endeavors, I think that would be great.
Um, so what was it like to live on the road in that little VW van?
Uh, it's not as glamorous as I'm sure it might sound. It was all right. I mean, it was fun. There was definitely some very fun moments, or at least I enjoy retelling those moments. Um, we were definitely pretty cramped because there was me and three other people. We had a lot of film gear, and it was kind of like the van would from time to time have problems. At one point, reverse stopped working, and it's like all this stuff. But one nice thing about driving around in a Volkswagen is that people are, well, with the exception of cops, the rest of the population is always very happy to see a Volkswagen. So we'd be like in the parking lot in Missouri, and somebody would stop by, and everyone stops by and tells you that they had a van like that or whatever. It has so many good memories, and people stop by and give you beer or like sandwiches and
What's wrong with
stuff.
that?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty fun. I'm sure no one will ever forget it. It definitely had some difficult moments, various people having diarrhea or like parts of the van falling off or something. But yeah, because we were sort of subsisting for at least a large portion of our diet on these freeze-dried backpacking meals. Yeah, we got some donated from Backpackers Pantry, and so we're trying to like save as much money as we could. So we were just trying to eat that for as much as we could handle. But you could really only eat so many freeze-dried meals in a period of time.
I know what you mean. I've only spent a week at a time on them, but they do some damage.
Yeah, that they do. I'm like, man, I never want to eat the Louisiana red beans and rice particular, menu ever again. Remember when we just had a big pot of Louisiana red beans and rice and just be driving and like spoon it in, like no stopping. We just spoon in Louisiana red beans and rice. It was terrible. But see, look, it's so fun to talk about now.
Jumping back to you talking about various issues with the van. I remember seeing on Twitter that you were having brake issues. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that was mostly my fault. We just left Yosemite, and it was still so early in the year that a lot of the passes were closed. And it was just a very short distance we had to travel from here to here. But since the pass was closed, we had to drive all the way around this way. We went down this pass called Monitor Pass, which, it took us like 2 days to get to the top of it because we're like creeping up 25 miles an hour uphill. It was just like very slow going because we only have 4 gears and we don't have a radiator. And like even if I tried to gun it, we would still be going 25 miles. Everyone's like passing us or honking or whatever. So by the time we got to the top, um, I got maybe a bit over enthusiastic, and I was like, all right, finally some downhill. And everyone was just sleeping. Everyone in the van was sleeping. I was just driving, and I just put it into neutral and was like, woo, except like this woo kind of just kept lasting. It was so long. I didn't know it was such a sustained like end to the pass. I'd never been on Monitor Pass before. So I'll blame it on that. And it's a one lane for the most part. I think the whole thing is one lane. It's one lane. It's like kind of windy, and it's a pretty sheer drop too. And so, like little by little, this creeping realization comes uh, that I've got my foot all the way down on the brake, and I'm still going like 30 some miles an hour, and I'm like, I can't shift into. Kind of had some clutch problems, anyways. This is right about the time we lost reverse and everything. I couldn't get down into second, and I mean, in retrospect. Well, whatever. In retrospect, hindsight's 2020. So, anyways, there was a lot of things I would do now, having already done that whole trip, that could have helped the situation. But at the time, I was just like, I don't know. So I just was like, and 30 miles an hour around these little turns was like way faster I would have ever driven that van. We also had trailer on the back, a little two-wheeled thing with some gear, and the wind and everything's just pushing us down. That might have been had something to do with it. But yeah, so eventually I was just, just getting nervous and sweat beads, finally the girl in the front, Korean, wakes up and she rolls down the window and she was like, "Oh man, it smells terrible out there." I was like, "Yeah, that's the brakes." And I explained the situation, and slowly everyone else woke up and sort of learned that we were careening down this pass without full function of our brakes. And eventually there was a point where they had a ditch, one of those ditches specifically for cars losing control. And we sort of, rolled into that and came to a stop. And we waited a really long time, hoping the brakes would sort of cool off. And I guess they did a little bit because we had some function of them, but mostly just starting from a slower speed helped us out. So eventually we got to the bottom. And luckily at the base in Bishop, there's this German auto body repair guy or mechanic, and we took it to him and said, yeah, because you could hear it would take me quite a while to come to a complete stop at a stoplight, and it was just metal on metal. And the guy, we showed it to him, and he was just like, "Wow, this is like the worst." It happens a lot there, but he said, "Yeah, this is pretty bad." He showed us; he was just completely mortified that all the brake was just completely worn away. And which also didn't help was the fact that the back brakes were also frozen. So the back brakes weren't actually working at all, which I think also helped, created played its role in that in that whole situation. So yeah, we actually ended up having to wait like 3 days in Bishop to get the brakes fixed.
Yeah, I remember seeing you guys stuck there for a couple days.
It was just like we were doing so good. We just did all these interviews, like and then we just like 3 days of complete the doldrums, and like it was a long 3 days. We had to hitchhike back into town every day after we dropped the van off, and then like no one would pick up. Who's gonna pick up 4 kids with like a crap load of video gear? Maybe once we got a ride from some German guys, and the other times we had to just walk.
Sounds like quite the adventure.
Yeah, I learned my lesson, and nobody was hurt, so that's good.
Absolutely. So back to the film a little bit. When can people expect to see the finished product?
Well, hopefully by spring, I think is what we're going for. We showed a cut in Colorado a couple months ago, I think in November. And now that we finished our Kickstarter and successfully raised money on that, hopefully things should go pretty fast, because we were basically just waiting for that money to get some of this the master copy of some footage from various newsreels that we're using. So really it's just a matter of me finishing the edit. So I think by spring would be probably when you could come back, and hopefully we'll have it ready to show.
That's exciting. I can't wait to see it.
Me too.
So I know you're kind of done with the fundraising stuff. The Kickstarter thing's over, but if anybody wants to get involved or even just check out what you guys are doing, how can they find you?
Well, we pretty much have everything linked up to our website. If you just go to lastwildmountain.com, from there we've got a blog that occasionally we write mildly interesting things in, and Twitter, and a Facebook page, which I do try to update that pretty frequently. So you can follow us on any of those things if you're interested. And from there's like a YouTube channel too. And we have a couple clips. Ideally, when we're done, we want to have a whole library on YouTube of every person we interviewed, kind of profiled, something really short. So yeah, and we did finish our Kickstarter. If people do still want to donate money or time or resources, you can always just email me, like info@lastwildmountain.com. And we're pretty much always still fundraising. You could donate directly to our IFP account, which is like a nonprofit umbrella filmmaking organization. And, you can donate a tax-deductible donation. Taxes, maybe you need that now. I don't know. But yeah, so you can always donate there. We can definitely always use the money, because pretty much everything we just raised on Kickstarter, it's going to go like that. Because, the rights alone to get the footage from, NBC, etc., pretty much that money will all go right away. So, if people watching this, if someone's watching this who has money and they want to donate it to a cause, that's certainly something that I would always encourage.
Do you have anything specifically important you'd like to mention?
No, I just, thank you for wanting to interview me and for following the whole project as long as you have been.
Yeah, I've been following it since pretty much the beginning. Um, so what's next for you, and after this craziness with this film subsides?
I don't know. I don't know. We should do something. What do you have in mind, Patrick? Maybe we'll do what you want to do.
I don't know. I got lots and lots of crazy ideas. So if you want to do something crazy, always I'm always up for some kind of crazy project.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we'll do that because I don't know what I'm gonna do.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I have for you right now. Um, thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for letting me ramble on.